Welcome to the Bucher and Friends podcast. Here is your host.
Let's send it over to Rick Bucher.
Rick Bucher.
Welcome to another episode of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast Network. I'm Rick Bucher. You can read my stuff on Bleacher Report, and you can find me on Twitter at Rick Bucher. And you can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Bucher Friends. It is my great pleasure to introduce and welcome to the show a longtime executive, former GM of the Phoenix Suns, part of a family. I don't know if it's royal family when it comes to sports, but certainly has left a big footprint on the sports world and continues to do so. Ryan McDonough. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time. I truly appreciate it.
Rick, I appreciate you having me on.
I have to tell you that, you know, in doing the research, as I do in having anybody on, and I'll Google just to see what's up, to make sure that I'm up with the current whatever's going on. And Ryan McDonough and GOATs is one of the first Google offerings when I go there. And I'm not sure that I ever thought, or perhaps you ever thought, that those two things would be necessarily connected in being in the sports world.
Well, no, I guess growing up in the suburban Boston area, and you know, it wasn't a rural environment by any stretch. It was probably closer to urban than rural.
Right.
But growing up in the Boston suburbs, yeah, there weren't a lot of goats, roaming around. But that story certainly gained a lot of traction over the last 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah. So my understanding is that, first of all, you are confirming that and we're not going to get into the ins and outs of Kevin Arnovitz's story for ESPN on the Suns and their owner, Robert Sarver. Pretty much, if you've spent any time in the NBA, everybody has a Robert Sarver story. I have them going all the way back. I think it was one of the lockouts, and we'll save that for another time. But You're confirming not only did you have goats in your office, but the timing of it was particularly unique.
Yeah, I did, Rick, and I feel bad for Robert with how that part of the story at least is being portrayed. It was funny. I mean, it was a funny thing. He thought it was funny. I thought it was funny. Everybody who was in the building that day thought it was funny. What happened was it was June 30th of 2017, and I remember the date because, as you mentioned, it was an important day. It was the eve of free agency, and we were a cap space team that year. So, we had some meetings that morning to get ready for free agency, and that night the Phoenix Mercury were playing at home, led by the great Diana Taurasi, one of the greatest, or probably the greatest women's basketball player of all time, and someone who, by the way, Rick, would make an excellent candidate to be a coach or a scout or whatever Diana wants to do with an NBA team.
Yeah.
If and when I'm back with the club at some point, she'd be on my short list of people to pursue hiring. But anyway, so that
I'm a
night,
huge fan.
That night the Mercury were playing at home. And I believe Diana had just set the WNBA scoring record, the all-time WNBA scoring record. So there was an event at the arena where goats were brought in, for the game that night, and to honor Diana.
So it was the euphemism, goats, greatest of all time. That was literally, they were using that. They brought them in for that reason, to reflect she's one of the greatest of all time.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The goats were there for Diana. But I think from what I remember on Robert's way into the building, he saw the goats and got their handlers to wrangle them and bring them up to my office. And I was down in his office getting ready to meet with him. And he called and said, "Come down to your office." And I opened the door and got a heck of a surprise. And like I said, it was funny. I mean, it was not. And I think and hope the article portrays it in that way. At least I hope it portrays it that way. It was not malicious. It was not mean-spirited. It was a fraternity house prank, right?
Yeah,
and everybody in the building had a good laugh when it happened.
So moving forward, that's obviously a unique experience that you had as a GM. You're now in a unique position where you're not consumed by the NBA at the moment. And I wonder what that's been like for you, because it is a consuming job. You wake up every day how do we win? How do we get better? And there's a million directions you can go in order to accomplish that. And then it's presumably sort of full stop, and you get to be a lot of other things. How exciting, how jarring has that been for you?
It's been an interesting transition, Rick. And for those who don't know my history, I was hired by Wick Grousbeck and Steve Pagliuca, the great Celtics owners, in February of 2003. So from February of 2003, I was with the Celtics for 10 plus years until May of 2013. Obviously had a great run there with Danny Ainge making brilliant basketball decisions, and certainly helped when we were able to acquire Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen to go alongside Paul Pierce, and 3 Eastern Conference Finals, 2 NBA Finals, and a championship later. We all look pretty good because of that. So in May of 2013, after 10 plus years with a great organization in Boston, I got a call from the Suns, and they were interested in interviewing me for their GM spot. So I was hired by Phoenix in May of 2013. Obviously the first year and a half, I think we did pretty well after winning 48 games the first year, and the second year we were, I think, 28-20 before the wheels started to come off a bit, and then we launched into a full-blown rebuild. But so, long story short, I was in the league without a break from February of 2003 until October of 2018, this past October, when I was let go by the Suns. So really, over a 15 to 16 year period, doing it that level, doing it, and as you know, Rick, as well as anybody, you're as well connected in this league as anybody there is. It's a 365-day-a-year thing now.
Yep.
If you're an executive or a coach or an owner or someone who covers the league at a high level, there really isn't much, if any, of an off season anymore. So for me, it's been there've been pros and cons. Obviously, I miss going to work every day. I miss being around, the players and coaches and people in the building that you're, kind of in the trenches with, trying to figure it out. But at the same time, it's been great for me from a family perspective. My wife and I had a son 3 weeks ago, so to be around for the birth of our son and not be, on the phone like I was half the time when our daughter was born a few years prior when I was GM of the Suns, that part of it's been a lot of fun. And it's also given me the opportunity to dabble in some other things, like these media appearances. I've done a few podcasts now. I hosted a Sirius XM NBA radio show with Jared Greenberg last Friday. So doing all that, it's been a lot of fun, and it's also given me, I think, a very different perspective on the league. Because as you know, Rick, when you're not inside with a team, I think when you can take a step back, you see the league a little bit differently.
Yeah, for sure. I talked to Billy King just the other day. In fact, he was on the podcast, and he was saying, he's still, when he watches a game, he can't just watch a game. He's evaluating, he's thinking, okay, he'll run and go check somebody's contract. Like, if you move this guy or who's available, I mean, it's hard to get that out of your DNA once you've done that. When it comes to watching, whether it's the Suns, DeAndre Ayton, who drafted, what is it like for you? How involved still are you? How much are the wheels still turning when anything NBA-centric comes across your path?
Oh, it's still a big part of my life, Rick, and I think whether it's on the team side or as a media member, I'll either jump back in with the team or try to even become more involved in the media aspect of it. So it's something I do every day. I watch multiple games a day. I have a Synergy account that allows me to break down film of NBA players and college players. I have a pretty unique TV setup at my house. Which, as you know, with 2 young kids, I'm home a lot these days with a 2-year-old and a 3-week-old. So at night after they go to bed, I have a TV set up where I can watch 4 games at a time. And, I try to watch as many as I can, primarily NBA, but also college. So I stay up to date on the players coming into the league through the draft. So it's something that, I think it'll always be a part of me. I'm not planning on going to be a scientist or a doctor, something that involves thinking a lot and having a real job. That seems hard. So I think as long as somebody will have me, whether that's on the team side or the media side, I'll stick with basketball, and I'm excited to see what the next steps are.
So we have something fairly in common, because you've had your 2 kids fairly close together, and mine are now 14 and 15, probably about 16 months apart. But we went through the same thing, and before we started recording, you were saying, and I have two, and I think these are going to be our two, right? And I remember my wife distinctly was like, okay, this is it, because having the two together like that is being introduced to parenthood and then exponentially going to two. It was quite the experience. When first of all, I had developed tremendous appreciation, greater appreciation than I ever had for my wife. But there were times where I was like, you know what? My job, like doing the job, covering the NBA, however stressful that might be, that does not compare to trying to figure this out. And there was a part of me that's like, yeah, you know what? If I get busy with work, it's not the worst thing in the world, because I feel like I'm more in my element than having to, okay, one threw up on me and the other one's screaming for something to eat. How do I navigate this?
It gives you great appreciation for anybody who stays at home, especially the mothers who stay at home to take care of the kids. And I think unless you've done it, you don't realize what a full-time job that is. I mean, it's funny, people ask what I've been up to and how I'm doing. I said, well, I got fired as GM of the Phoenix Suns, and somehow life got busier. Yeah. I don't know how that happened, but it seems to have been the case. But it's been a lot of fun. We were lucky. Our daughter's 2 and healthy and happy and doing great, and our son is 3 weeks old, so he just basically sleeps and eats, and
yep.
We change his diapers all day. So it's been, again, a lot of fun to be present for that. In fact, when our daughter was born, the day after our daughter was born, we initially come up with the Suns with one of our players, which had me on the phone a lot at the hospital.
Yeah. Yep.
So here we are as new parents with our first child, a 1-day-old daughter, and my wife was looking at me kind of cross-eyed, like, "Hey, why are you on the phone right now?
Yeah.
What are you doing?" But if you're a GM or head coach or an owner or prominent member of the media like yourself, that's the job. That's what it is, and that's what it entails. So I think at some point I may want to get back into that, and we may want to put myself through that torture, and I mean torture in a good way again. But for now, I'm enjoying a little bit of downtime with the family.
Well, and so here's the thing, and I look at your success, and the countless guys I know around the league who have found their place, their niche, and with a team, and they're sort of in middle management, and whether it's because of ability or lack of interest or ambition or whatever it is, they never take the leap that you did in taking a GM job and taking the Suns job and knowing, what it entailed. And by the way, for everybody who's forgotten, 2014, Ryan was the runner-up to R.C. Buford for Executive of the Year. And whether it's Arnovitz's piece or some of the other things that I've seen out there, I think people realize everything that the Suns have gone through. People have forgotten you got that job for a reason, and what you were able to do initially in it, that some of that has gone by the wayside. Nonetheless, having done it, having risen to that level, and I kind of feel like your brother Sean in going to Monday Night Football experienced a similar thing. So you rise to the top of the mountain, you're willing to take that shot, you get there, and then for one reason or another, you're no longer at the top of the mountain. And you have to regather yourself and figure out, okay, so, what do I do next and how do I get there? And it's almost like your ambition and your ability are something you have to contend with now moving forward in your career, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense to me, Rick. And obviously over the last few months, I've been doing a lot of reflecting on my time with the Suns and what we did well as a group and, what I could do better going forward if I do jump back in with a team. And, my thing, I guess the way I've always lived my life is I'd always rather give something a try and know how it went, good or bad, than not try. And what I mean by that is Boston is a unique place. It's a great organization led by, great ownership and Wick Grousbeck and Steve Kalyuka I mentioned. And then, in my opinion, the best executive in the league or certainly one of the best in Danny Ainge. And the culture that they've built there and going back to Red Auerbach and, over a 4 or 5 decade period is as good as any in sports. And so I liked it there. As I mentioned earlier in the pod, that's where I'm from. That's home for me and my family. We have deep roots in New England, in that community. So that would have been, I think, relatively safe and easy to be the assistant GM of the Celtics and kind of run the scouting department and help Danny Ainge make decisions. And Danny was great as far as delegating a lot to Mike Zarin and I. Who are 2 assistant GMs, and Mike's still there, and I think will be a president or GM of an NBA team, whatever he wants to be. And so, Mike and myself and Danny's son Austin Ainge came in later and joined us. We had a good thing going, but I was always curious about being a GM and trying it. And obviously people have been critical of my time in Phoenix, and I understand that. Our record the last couple of years was not great. It's probably an understatement, but I think the team is well positioned going forward with Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. They'll have another top pick in this draft. They have another first-round pick from the Milwaukee Bucks, and I think that team does have a lot of potential and a lot of young talent to build around. So for me, Rick, I'd always rather try something and succeed or fail, by having done it and tried it. And now I've taken a step back. You mentioned, Sean with Monday Night Football. He did that for 2 years and is now, doing something a little bit different. He's back on college basketball and college football, but he's really happy. And, that's kind of what I'm looking forward to for whatever the next step is for me. It's not about, being a president or GM or assistant GM. I was very fortunate to, work for the Suns for 5 years and have another year or 2 left on my contract. So, Mr. Sullivan, the organization, they were very good to me financially. And for me, it's about, again, being around good people and working for a common goal and working with people that I like and trust. And, I think I can have some success with going forward.
There is, I was just thinking, there is a thing, though, that, like, as a GM, you are in a very small circle, a very unique club. And I wonder, like, stepping outside of that club, how different it is, how much you miss it. I don't know whether you maintain those connections or relationships, but obviously it's a matter of, priority and your time and their time and everything else. Like how different is it when you kind of stop and think about, like, all the guys that you talk to, like, on a regular basis on the phone or saw because you were in the same place as scouting or events or whatever it might be, that because of this sudden switch in your position, like, you're not connected with them in the same way?
Yeah, I think, when you go through something like this, Rick, and, I was fortunate again to have been in the NBA for 15 plus years without getting fired. As you know, that probably makes me in the minority. Right? For sure. Executives and coaches and, people with teams, it's not a stable business. It's just by the nature of it, especially as we sit here in 2019, there's a lot of turnover. So for me, after it all went down in the preseason in October, I took a month or so to decompress. And then what was really neat for me was that a lot of my friends around the league reached out and said, hey, hang in there. We know you're talented. We know you'll bounce back from this. And, a lot of teams invited me to come visit. So between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I did go and visit 4 NBA clubs, clubs where, I respect how they do business or, have friends in the organization. Or I think in most cases, maybe in all cases, both of those things were true. So, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I went and visited the Denver Nuggets, the Utah Jazz, the Golden State Warriors, and the San Antonio Spurs. And as you know, those are 4 of the top clubs in the league.
Sure.
And they all do things well, in my opinion. They all do things a little bit differently. So for me, it was really neat, not only to keep the relationship strong with the executives and coaches and employees for those teams, but also to see how they do business, Rick, because as you know, when you're with a team or you're with a media outlet, the other ones aren't helping you, right? Yeah. This is a competitive deal. So for 15 years, I was, inside the walls, so to speak, in Boston and then in Phoenix. And, we're friendly, we're cordial in the league as executives, but nobody's trying to help. You're trying to do whatever you can to gain an edge, gain an advantage, and so visiting those teams was really neat for me. And it's been cool to stay in touch with those guys after the visits. And I think, as you know, Rick, having been in the industry as long as you have, some of the relationships are maybe superficial or a little more on the surface. But when you do experience some adversity, you learn who your friends are.
Yep.
And which relationships existed because you could help people or they thought you may be able to help them, and who your real friends are who are there for you. And honestly, for me, over the last 3 or 4 months, that's been great. A lot of people around the league have been very nice and generous from teams, from media members, from the league office, and on. And that's been really refreshing to me. But I think one thing that's important that I realize even more now, Rick, and maybe we can talk about this a little more, is just how volatile the league is. I mean, you think of what's going on with the Lakers and what's going on with the Celtics and what's going on with the Pelicans. Well, if you rewind to last year, the Celtics were in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Pelicans were in the Western Conference Semifinals, and then after the playoffs ended, the Lakers got LeBron. And I think if you rewind, 6 to 9 months, what's happened with those three franchises in particular, it would have been really hard to envision, that going on over the last year or so.
Well, and so before we get to that, and I do want to address that, I'm just wondering of the teams that you met with and you got to kind of peek behind their curtains, was there what was the thing that you saw or learned or discovered that was an oh wow, and if I ever run a place or I'm part of a place moving forward, I'm stealing that or I'm using that or I'm going to make sure that we have that?
Yeah, I learned something from all of them, Rick. From the Denver Nuggets with Tim Connolly, the president of basketball operations, who, in my opinion, should be executive of the year in the NBA. I think he's done a phenomenal job. Building that team, drafting Nikola Jokic in the second round, which I think will go down as one of the great second-round picks in NBA history, and getting guys like Gary Harris and Malik Beasley later in the first round. I think Tim's done a phenomenal job, and one of the things that he really does a good job of there, and they really do a good job of there as a staff, is connecting with their players, and they have a strong bond, and strong relationships with their players, and frankly, Rick, that's something I didn't do as good a job as I could have or should have in Phoenix. So I learned that from Tim. The relationship is real that he has with Jamal Murray and Gary Harris and Jokic and some of their young core in particular. And then from there, I went to the Utah Jazz and just to see, what Dennis Lindsey's done there in Utah. They're a small market team, but they draft well, they develop well. They have an elite coach in Quinn Snyder, an elite staff. Behind him on the bench in terms of coaching and player development. It's interesting to see Dennis and to see Quinn, who passed through San Antonio. They brought some of the San Antonio culture and stability with them to Utah, but they've also put their own spin on it as well. And then, after that, I went to San Antonio and to see, Greg Popovich and R.C. Buford and just the structure they have in place, how organized everything is, how they're, how structured everything is from the player development to the weight room, to how that translates to, the court in the schemes offensively and defensively that Pop and his staff put in place. It's just a well-oiled machine, and you can tell those guys have been doing it for a long time. And, let's be honest, they've been as successful as any franchise in pro sports in this country over the last 2 decades. And then, finally, Rick, my last stop was Golden State, and who's done better than Golden State over the last 4 or 5 years? They're on, what I think is the best run in the history of our league, and just the joy that comes from that franchise. And it's interesting. They're when you think about them and San Antonio, those two in particular, they're, the two best franchises in the league, I would say, or a lot of people would say, at least, over the last 5 or 10 years. But they're completely different, right? San Antonio is more structured and more, I don't say militaristic, that's too strong of a word,
buttoned
but
up.
More, very organized. It runs like a machine.
Yeah.
Whereas Golden State is very loose. It's fun. Steve Kerr's, who's off to the best coaching start in NBA history, maybe in sports history. His thing is, one of his main principles, his guiding principles, is joy, as you know, Rick, having covered the team a lot and living out that way. So it was really fun for me to see all that. I think, if your best player or the player you built your foundation around is Tim Duncan, then you probably are a little more structured, a little more regimented. And if your best player, your foundational player, and your building block is Steph Curry, it's probably a little looser, and there's more joy, right? So that's a long-winded way of saying I learned something from all of them, and if I do get back with the team at some point, I'll try to take bits from here and there.
Yeah. So you're in a unique position because you obviously grew up with a legendary figure in media in your dad, the late Will McDonough. And yet when you talk about the volatility that has impacted the Lakers, the Pelicans, and the Celtics, a lot of people would point to the fact that those that their business was out there in the public eye and was being parsed, and that created a lot of the conflict and controversy. And we could go to the San Antonio. I don't know if people in the league with me would refer to them or refer to San Antonio as having the Iron Dome. Like nothing ever got out of that place, and yet we just had the Kawhi Leonard experience where for the first time that dome was pierced. So with all of your experience and your background, like thinking about being a GM and seeing what the repercussions are with social media and the hunger and appetite for content, like how do you navigate that? How would you going back to it, what do you do in trying not to allow it to negatively impact your team?
It's very challenging, Rick. In today's 24/7 news cycle, as you know, there's a huge appetite for content and a huge interest in content, especially for me, when we talk about trades and where players are going to go in free agency.
Yeah.
Right? It just seems like a lot of times the hot stove talk, if you will, or the off-season talk about who's going to get traded or who's going to sign where, in my opinion, sometimes overshadows the games, which I personally don't really enjoy. But that's the world we live in. That's the media climate we live in, and that's a reality of working for or playing for an NBA team in 2019. That's just part of the deal. The biggest challenge for me, I think, or for any executive, is, well, let me put it this way, Rick. There's so many rumors. There's so much information out there. Some of it is accurate and valid. Some of it is just either fabricated or made up or completely off base. But you can't really react to it organizationally. Because I tell people all the time, like if you're a GM and people say, hey, what about this, what about that, and you deny, well, even if something's not true, the next time you get asked about it, if you don't deny it, then people are going to assume it's true because you just denied everything else. And as you can imagine, that gets a little bit exhausting. So,
sure.
I thought when I was with the Celtics, Danny Ainge did a great job of communicating with the players about the media noise and all the rumors out there. And I remember him telling Al Jefferson, Rick, that he said, hey Al, I'm not looking to trade you. I don't want to trade you. But if we can get Tim Duncan or Kevin Garnett for you, I'm going to trade you for those guys. Mm-hmm. And he was just honest with them, and that was when Al was a Celtic, and sure enough, Garnett became available from the Timberwolves, and Al was the central part of that package, which I believe involved 5 players and 2 first-round picks. But so I think that honesty helps, but it's getting harder. I mean, there are more and more people around the players, from their family members to their agents to their workout guys to their friends, and just kind of having a direct line of communication or making sure everybody's on the same page as far as what the organization is looking to do and how much you can communicate with the players. I think, again, that's something I didn't do a great job of in Phoenix, but I think it's something that as a league, for the most part, teams are struggling with. Yeah. What to let players know, because the last thing you want to do, Rick, is be a hypocrite, right? You never want to tell a player, especially a young player, that hey, we're not going to trade you, we're not looking to trade you, and then a week later turn around and trade the guy, right? That's how your credibility gets shot, and that's one thing I think I never did in Phoenix. I never lied to anybody. I think, misrepresented what we were looking to do, what we were trying to do. But there's a balance and a line there that's hard to find between being honest and open and not giving away any trade secrets or not putting all your cards on the table.
Yeah, no, we've certainly seen that. Masai Ujiri, and I've heard different variations of what went on and where DeMar got the idea that he was not going to be traded. But yeah, you bring up a great point. It's like you want to be honest, but you also, in this day and age, you don't know where that information is going to go or how it's going to be utilized or how it might boomerang on you. All right, that does it for this episode of Bucher and Friends. Because there was so much to get into with Ryan and he was so enlightening, we decided we'd break this podcast up into 2 parts, this conversation. So this is part 1. Part 2 will be released next Wednesday, again on the usual Bucher and Friends day. And in the meantime, tomorrow I'll be joined by a different Ryan Hollins, as he usually appears with me on Thursdays and Fridays. And we will get into the Luke Walton situation and the rumors that he might be headed for UCLA sooner rather than later. Hollins is, of course, a UCLA alum. I wonder how he feels about the prospect of Luke making that switch and where it might take the program. In the meantime, if you enjoyed the show, or even if you don't, just drop us a rating. All you have to do is go on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, click the stars, however many stars you want to give us. And then if you want us to do something for you, screenshot that review and tweet it to us at Bucher Friends, and you'll be entered for a chance to win some prizes. Now, I promise you, good or bad on the rating, it doesn't matter. You give us 5 stars, you got the same chance of getting a prize as someone who gives us 1 star. We rather have your honest appraisal of the show than just trying to curry favor in order to get something free. I know that kind of works against human nature, but that's what we're asking. In the meantime, as always, thanks for listening.